Episode 1, Sassenach. This is a brilliant episode by Ron Moore. He wrote the first episode of the first 3 seasons to set the tone for each season. It gives the origin story, and it's a wonderful picture of Claire's personal history in the beginning and her marriage and traveling back in time. They used film coloring to show the difference in time, which I thought was very clever. It exposes you to the lore and superstition of the Highlands. It follows very closely to the book in meeting BJR and being saved by Murtaugh and Jamie. All that's very close to the book. Some of the observations I have on that is it parallels the reckoning in the opening. When you get Jamie's POV, it has the same line where it says strange, the things you remember. You saw it in the first episode with Claire, and then you see it in the reckoning episode that's in Jamie's POV. He says the same opening line, so that's kind of like the opening of both halves of the season, which was interesting. There's foreshadowing in the first half with Mrs. Vera and Mrs. Graham and the Reverend and the sightseeing. You see a lot of foreshadowing for the episode. And we have Frank sees Jamie's ghost in their conversation after. When he sees Jamie's ghost and he comes to the room, he says to Claire, you know, I was thinking maybe it was someone that you nursed that wanted to reconnect. And that it turns out that Jamie is someone that she nursed, and he was looking to reconnect. So it's kind of like he said that without really saying it, knowing he was saying actually what it was, which I always thought was interesting. The forget-me-nots in the title card will be intrinsic to the end of the series. We just don't know exactly how. I predict that one of them probably planted it for her to have something to go back to the Stones for. And why do you think she ended up at that time? I think it was because both BJR and Jamie were near the Stones at that time. And I think that because she was BJR was on the mind because they were researching him. And I think Jamie had just come, his ghost had just come to visit, and I think that pulled her into that time. Jamie is immediately struck by Claire, and here's that scene.
Don't you dare! It's time to start. Once. Your Becky's on, you do it like that. You have to get the bone of the upper arm in correct position before it slips back into joint. Hold him steady. This is the worst part.
I'm here. It doesn't hurt anymore.
It will. You'll be tender for about a week. You need a sling. You, fetch me an old piece of cloth or a belt.
Fetch me, she said.
Bring a belt.
Taking a guess you've done this before.
I'm a nurse.
So that was really an interesting moment because of course, that's when Jamie first, starts to fall for her, But also there's a thing right there where there's a trust established right from the moment they meet because he's basically trusting her that she knows what the hell she's doing. You know what I mean? And she looks at him and she says, this is the worst part. He looks at her and he nods. And it was kind of like this little moment of trust right from the get-go with them too. And so I like that because it was, their whole relationship is based on a lot of mutual trust, and it's like right from the first moment they met, there was a situation where one had to trust the other, and they had to work together in something. So I like that. You also see the history versus reality, and her first impression of BJR compared to what they had studied, and so forth was not quite what she planned. And you see the use of color. You see the costume blue, a lot of blue for Claire when she wears blue because that's for Vera. And you also, they do a neat thing in the show where you see her losing pieces of herself from the minute she comes through the stones. You see through the costuming, everything starts to fall off of her. First she loses a button and she loses her watch and her belt ends up being caught on something and goes. And then next thing, when she goes to take care of Jamie, she starts ripping her dress, pieces of her dress off to make bandages for him. And little by little by little, it's like she's shedding her identity. She's shedding parts of herself as she's going through the stones. And she comes through, it starts to take away what she was. That's what that kind of is a symbol of. Wraps also play a big role. You see she left a wrap. That was the first thing she lost. Her wrap stays by the stones as she was wearing her little shawl. And then you see Jamie wrap her in his shawl to protect her against the rain and the cold. And that's kind of like she's taking on this new thing to protect her. And so it's a lot of symbolism in there. You also see that Frank kind of still saves her in a different context because you see her relying on his advice to help her through this. So even though he isn't saving her physically, she's relying on him and having his advice in her head to help her in different spots and to help her get through things. She relies on him and he's getting her through with the knowledge he gave her, you know. And of course this here is one of our favorite scenes, so we'll play it anyway. This is when they get hit with Cop Man and Rock.
Boss, get away. Start.
Hope you haven't been misusing that shoulder. Your hat.
This lot isn't in my blood. Not much you're telling me. The Dougal and the others will be waiting further up the stream. We should go.
I'm not going with you.
Yes, you are.
What? Are you going to cut my throat if I don't?
Why, no. But you don't look that heavy. Now, if you won't walk, I shall pick you up and throw you over my shoulder. Do you want me to do that?
Yes, please.
Well then. I suppose that means you're coming with me.
I volunteer as tribute now. Claire, in Castle LEOCH, which is episode 2, she's hit with a contrast of life in the 18th century. She finds a friend in Mrs. Fitz, and she gets the shock of her situation. It gives viewers the same kind of an impact by being in her POV. We first see look at Jamie's history and conflict with BJR. And the conversation by the fire is a pivotal moment because it's when, according to him, he falls in love with her, was when he gave her comfort by the fire and determines that he will protect her. It's also the first time we see Jamie's scars. And scars in Diana's writing is a very key thing in her writing because scars and markings tell a story. That's kind of the thought behind it. And so every major event, every major moment in their lives is marked with some kind of a scar. You know, even some they didn't put in the show. But the point where, you know, he gets, where Randall came to their farm, there's a little triangular scar marked on his neck from that. Then the flogging scars. When they leave each other and part of the stones, they carve each other's initials in their hands to mark that time. You know, there's like a lot of things. Culloden left him with a big scar down his leg. So every major moment in the books kind of is marked with some type of a marking, you know, and that's a thing, a device of Diana's in the books. We see bonding and symbolism with the clothing. If you notice, you see in this picture, can you see my little arrow? Okay. In this picture, down here. You see how they're matching up almost identical in their costuming. They both have the plaid on the bottom and the brown and white on the top. It's kind of their show's way of kind of connecting them visually, so it was an element they used on the show to show that. There's also a lot of mirror symbolism in the show, where you see every time Claire is like looking at her reflection, she's doing some type of self-reflection, or it's a major moment that she's pondering in that moment. You see her do it in the window with the vase, and she's looking, you see her reflection kind of in the window. You see in Castle LEOCH, when she gets all dressed with Mrs. Fitz, and then she's looking in the mirror like, holy crap, you know, this is my life now, you know. So you'll see it all through when she gets her wedding, when she has her wedding. You see when she's remembering her and Frank's wedding, and then it comes back to the present or past where she is, and she's sitting in front of a mirror, looking in the mirror. So it's always like a mirror involved or a reflection involved when she's having a major moment or a thought. Colin, who is crippled, is also a force, and he tries to get her intoxicated to interrogate her. I think she hurts her cause a little because she lets him know about that she knows about Hamish in their little mouthy way. So it kind of puts her already on the list because he doesn't want people to know that, of course. So it kind of puts her on his radar. Claire meets Galus, who begins to try to work her for information, and who also, I think, believes she's a time traveler from the start. Jamie takes a beating for Leary to save her shame, but it gives Leary the wrong impression. You know, she gets her big crush starting at that moment. She thinks that she's going to be out in 5 days, and she takes time to kind of appreciate the life, and her perspective starts to shift. She starts to look around and observe these people are now real, and she thinks, I'm going to be gone. Let me take a minute to kind of take this in. So I think her perspective shift starts to happen there. And then she, at the end, becomes the resident hermit that, you know, she was laughing and joking with Frank about when she was in that very room, which I thought was great. There's also a little homage to The Godfather when Dougal leaves, or when they put her in that room, and then he walks out and he shuts the door on her, and she's just left sitting there like trapped like a rat. It's that homage to the end of Godfather when Michael Corleone does that to his wife and shuts her in, and it was that closed door feeling. That's what they meant to do with that scene. So that's what I thought was interesting. You know what? So we got a lot to do. I got a lot of really great interviews too in here. So you guys like the interviews, right?
Yeah.
You like when I put the video clips in and stuff? Okay. So The Way Out, episode 3. This comes from a phrase, the way out is always through. And it opens on Claire saying goodbye to Frank at the train station. And Frank wants to use his connections to get her a way out of doing, having to serve on the front lines, and he's really, you know, concerned about that. And we see Claire's courage to face things head on because that's who she is. That's how she approaches life. So it kind of sets up the episode that she's a person that's committed to facing her fears and to take things head on, you know. And she's going to do that a lot here as well. She's not going to listen to the common beliefs out there. The themes in this episode is science and reason versus superstition, honesty versus deception, freedom versus restraint is the common themes throughout this episode. And we see her promise to return to Frank as she heads off to fight a German threat. And then in the show, she faces a German threat with this plant that came from Germany that's affecting Tanis, and she's out to conquer that as well. So it's kind of a little tie-in there. Then as she's thinking of Frank and remembering this scene of leaving him and promising him that she'll return, all of a sudden she gets cold water dumped on her, and she's like, like this, and you see that scene where she kind of gets shocked awake, and it's very symbolic, like cold water's being thrown on her, telling Frank that she's going to return. So there's like a lot of little elements in there that are symbolic. The episode is all about Claire inundated with superstition in the Highlands and her finding her way through it. We see her with Galus, talking about that, and Navali, the guy with the kid with the ear on the post, and has, Jamie help her yank that out because she doesn't get the customs of that, like that's foreign to her time period. And we see it with Thomas with the believing that he was possessed. And then you start to see in this episode Jamie and Claire operating as a team, which is very key to their relationship. That's kind of their process. Their teamwork is what makes them such a great couple. And so we see that as well in this episode. You saw it really in their first meeting when she's like, okay, she's fixing his shoulder and she says, okay, this is going to be the worst part, and he nods, and it's kind of like they're working kind of together, and he's trusting her. It's kind of that kind of started it right from the bat, but you really see it in this episode, him kind of teaming with her to help her with things. And it's kind of ironic that Claire sits and judges everybody for their superstitious elements that they believe, and she scoffs at it, kind of snobbish, in the way that she scoffs at it. And it's kind of funny because look at her, she just came through stones 200 years. She's nobody to be scoffing at, at superstition and magic. And I think Galis, because I think Galis knows what she is, she reminds her of that. So that's this scene here.
Was with you? The boy, Thomas, Fitz's nephew. When you say seized with evil, what exactly do you mean? Is he ill?
He's not ill. He's possessed. Do you not believe in demonic possession, Claire?
Do you?
I believe there are powers beyond my ken. Beyond what we can see and hear and touch. Demon, fairy, devil, doesn't matter what name you put on them. But you believe in the powers of magic, do you not?
Haven't really thought much about it.
Have you ever found yourself in a situation with no earthly explanation?
You have to admit, it's certainly possible the boy's actually sick and not possessed. And if that's the case, then perhaps there's something you and I can do to help.
People believe the boy is possessed, Claire. You challenge that at your peril. I'll not go near him, and neither should you.
We also see Colm show Claire two sides of himself, back to back. First, we see his authority and self-respect and formidableness when he's dealing with the tailor who made his coat too long, and puts a knife to his throat and scares the hell out of Claire when he does it. Like holy smokes, like he didn't want his appearance to let her think, he's any less powerful. And then when he lays on the table for the massage, he's exposing his vulnerability to her. And he invites her to come see the bard at night that he's having at the hall. And I think it's his way of trying to let her in a little so that she feels like she can let her guard down. It's, because Claire, Colm is always turning the screw, turning the wheels and trying to find things out. So, trying to get Jamie to notice Leary turns into a diss fest on Leary in another scene. We see, there's a term we use in the clan gathering called Sassenach wasted. And we say, that's because Claire's always drunk, and half the time that you see her on the screen, she's drinking all the time. And so we're like, oh, there's Claire, Sassenach wasted again. So you see her Sassenach wasted in this moment between Jamie and Claire, and he tries to bring her back because he sees that she's a little too far gone, and he's trying to take care of her. So I like that scene. It's a really nice scene between them. And I think he's always looking to peacock for her at this point because he's trying to get her attention, and he's trying to make her notice him. So, he's doing different things, I think, to make her see him more like a man and not just, a young guy. And so that kiss with Leary in the alcove, I think was part of it, is that he wanted her to see him in that light, The shinty game was also another part of that. He said in the books, he says there at one point, I'm going to get myself killed showing off, which is true. So at the end, Dougal sets up a visit to Galis toward the end with Claire. And this is actually a plan between Dougal and Galis to try to work out where she's from. They're kind of teaming up to find out what the deal is with her. And you see, there's a lot of, I told you last week, there's a lot of Wizard of Oz references in the show. And here's another one that you have Galis with these bright red shoes on. You know, she's like the witch that was underneath the house with the red shoes. That's kind of what that is like an allusion to. So I thought that was neat. Claire determines to get back to the Stones after she hears Gwilyn tell a tale. That's like her tale. The Gathering and Rent, this episode and the next one, gives Claire and the viewers a deeper look into clan life, politics, and the brewing of the Rising. We see the daily culture, we see life on the road, and she sees the wool walking in the Rent episode. She wanders around the Gathering, kind of gets to know the people as they come, and she's treating them. And in traveling and caring for them, she begins to understand a little bit this culture, that this isn't just a history page, it's real people, you know. And history is starting to become real for her, little by little, and this is the episode you start seeing that happen. The theme of this episode is hunt and pursuit, and you see that with Jamie, he's being hunted, and then having to be out there and say who he is and make a declaration whether he's going to be with the Mackenzies or not. You see the boar hunt, and then you also see Claire being pursued with being followed by Rupert and Angus. There's a fairy tale motif in this episode. You'll see it opens with this surreal chase through the woods. It kind of has this Blair Witch Project vibe to it. The way it's shot, real with the smoke in the woods, and it's kind of, you know, you hear the breathing and the whole thing. And then it also has, it foreshadows the tone of the boar hunt that's going to happen later. And you see the Hansel and Gretel with her leaving breadcrumbs in the trees to find her way out. That's kind of like a Hansel and Gretel reference. We see Little Red Riding Hood here. If you look the way she's costumed and dressed, you know, it's kind of in the same like idea, carrying her little pouch. We see Mrs. Fitz is kind of like a fairy godmother because she's like, you know, I don't have anything to wear. I can't go to this fancy, you know, gathering, this swearing. And she's like, oh, no, we'll get you all fixed up. And she takes her out and she gets her all dressed fancy. And then she gets to come. And so you kind of get the fairy godmother element there. And then you even get a witch with an apple when Galis comes to visit her and she's holding an apple and talking to her. So there's all these little references to fairy tales in this episode. Claire underestimates the danger of her escape plan, and despite warning, she can't even get out of the castle without getting attacked, more or less make it all the way to Craignadoon, so she's kind of in a problem. Her escape plan gets busted, and Jamie's trying to get her safe back to the castle, lands him in a bad position in front of his uncles. And he handles that with typical Jamie style, and in the process irritates Dougal and earns respect from Colin, which is exactly what Dougal doesn't want to see happen. And when he enters, he kind of turns everybody's head, and it's like Cinderella entering the ball, you know. So there's all these little elements. We begin to see the dynamic of the Mackenzie brothers in this episode as well. We see there's like an inner conflict there between them. And you can see that when Dougal makes his oath to Colin, he does it, and he believes it. You can tell he feels it, but at the same time, it annoys him that, you know, he's really the more physical, correct person that could rule it. Because normally under this, you would pick the strongest fighter to lead the clan, but they didn't feel that he was smart enough to lead the clan, and so, you know, he has this situation with Colin, and he has to swear to him. And I think it kind of burns him a little on the inside, and you kind of see that he struggles with that. There's also an interesting little foreshadowing here because he bends down and he holds his dagger up. And he says, if my hand is ever raised in rebellion against you, may this dagger pierce my heart. And he ends up dying pierced in the heart with his dagger by Jamie. So when he went to rebel against Colin's wishes and join this rebellion. So it ends up that he actually falls in that way when he does this oath. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. We see another side of Dougal in the boar hunt, and when he's caring for one of his dying men, and he sees a new side of Claire and her nursing side, when she says, tell me about your home. He knows, as a war chief, he knows that that is a sign of a person that's seen war. That's what you do to dying men. You try to make their passing easier. And she's not fazed at all by the gruesomeness of this fork gouging that this man had. Instead, she went right into a mode of taking care of his death. And it tells Dougal, this woman is not any ordinary English woman. She's seen things in her life, you know. So we have Rent. Here's the preview for Rent.
Do you think I'm a spy for the British?
I do think there are things you're not telling us.
You're raising money for a war that you can't win.
You told us if the future is already decided. No man has to choose what's worth fighting for.
You're sowing the seeds of doubt in our midst.
I'm trying to warn you.
Woman
Outlander, new weapon.
So the thing with Tony Graffia episodes is they are usually very thematic and symbolic, but she takes a lot of liberties with the content and the characters, which is one of the. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with Tony Graffia because she does that. She thinks she kind of falls in love with her ideas, and she does her own thing with the episodes, and she always thinks she knows best, and she doesn't read ahead, which bothers me, because if you're going to do that, at least read ahead so you know if you're screwing something up down the road. So, but she didn't do that. So. But they're always fun to analyze because her episodes are always very symbolic. If you know she's writing an episode, take a look at all these. Take a look at what she includes. Everything that you see, a bird, any kind of a symbolism, any kind of a poetry, anything like that is going to have special meaning in her episode. So, and this is no exception. Rent, the title Rent, has 3 definitions: payment to occupy a property, a split in a party or group, if you have a segment of a group that goes off, and a large tear in a piece of fabric. And all 3 definitions apply in this episode. We have them collecting their rents. We have a split among columns plan that's secretly raising funds for the Jacobites. Dougal ripping Jamie's shirt to use his back to, gain support. So it's a beautiful episode. It's one of the most scenic episodes in the series, and it really shows off the character of Scotland. It's also a study in perception. It's a study in the blend of business, politics, and personal. When you say that's not business, that's personal. It's not personal, it's politics. This just shows you how kind of you try to keep things separate, but they all end up meshing together in the end, And so you see that because you see a major turn of perspective of all the characters. She starts out this opening shot. This is the opening shot right here, and you see her quoting this poem from John Donne. And the poem that she's quoting is called Presence in Absence. Present in Absence. And John Donne is also known for the quote, "No man is an island." That's like this famous John Donne quote. And in this episode, that poem is about having the person you love is absent from you. And so she's sitting out over this lake thinking about Frank, quoting this poem, missing, wanting to get home, and meanwhile she's also going to learn through this episode that a Highlander place is no place to be alone. So that's all part of the messaging in this group here. She starts out with a kindred spirit with Ned Gowan, and I think she sees a lot of Frank in Ned because he's educated. He's from the city. He has knowledge of poetry, and she can have these conversations with him. And so she kind of feels like he's a kindred spirit. But everyone else makes her feel very excluded. And she's being excluded for her language, for her sex, for her nationality, and obvious distrust of her. And Jamie of course, offers his friendship, but he also reminds her of where she is and not to forget who she is, because he sees she's getting a little out of hand. And he's worried for her, so he's trying to warn her a little bit. She gets annoyed and she walks off and she finds these women that are walking wool. And at first they're a little suspicious of her, but then they want to see her prove herself, and she rises to the challenge, jumps in and starts doing the wool walking with them. And she ends up like really getting into it, and she has like gains a lot of perspective of these women and this life and everything, and it starts to really make her feel part of it. Of course, Angus comes and rips her out of it, and here we see this clip of Angus pulling her away and her wanting to take a goat back to feed the baby. So this kind of gives you the idea of business versus personal, and like I was saying, so that's in this episode. You can kind of get the tone of this episode too, this clip.
Hey, where do you think you're taking that?
Back to her owners, the family needs her.
The goods ours, we're taking our wares.
The hell you are.
That's goods and chattels has to be accounted for.
How can he knew?
She's stolen the runk.
I am no such thing.
You'll be giving me the goat.
Go!
Where did you find her?
Away, cock-a-doodle-dee.
How hard is it to keep watching us on our ranch?
She's slippery as a eel, that will do.
Stop talking about me as if I'm not here. There's a baby that needs milk.
Stuck your head around mine. Beast is peeling for rent. Fair and square.
So you let a child go hungry.
The goat goes with us.
Then Lieutenant Old Foster comes along that we don't know is a lieutenant at first. He hears a fellow English woman having arguments with these Highlander men, and right away he's, gallant man that he is, he wants to try to intervene and help her. And they, of course, like, go politic, and they bound together, and they're like, this is none of your affair, And he basically sees that he's against all these Highlanders, but then later in the episode he comes back with his gang of people, So he leaves, and Dougal tries to then exploit Jamie for support. And this becomes a very political thing for Dougal, but it's very personal for Jamie, because Jamie doesn't want his scars shown to people, period. And Claire knows how he feels about it. So she feels badly. She gets judgmental with Angus about not eating food that they got from the watch. And they have an interesting conversation. Jamie comes over and rescues her from the situation with Angus. And he comes over and he says, what's your problem? What is your problem? And she says, where I come from, people don't do this. He said, it doesn't matter where you come from, You're here now. And you need to respect the rules here and respect things that you don't understand, And I thought, man, good advice. And a lot of people that watch this show and, read the books, if this goes with my presentism thing next week, should follow that, because that's exactly the thing, This is not where you come from. This is not your time. You're here now in this time, and there's things that are different, And Claire has to learn that lesson. Eventually, she does understand that this is a political situation, and she starts to grasp what's happening here. That this is the Jacobite rebellion getting money raised for it. And then she has a series of things that happen. She sees the English justice with the men up on the crosses with traitors carved into their chest. She sees, she has the Highlanders defend her honor, in a fight in the morning. And Jamie sleeps at her door. It's the cutest scene. Jamie sleeps at her door to protect her because there's some, raucous men in there, and he doesn't want her being disturbed. And it's a very sweet scene, but it's also the scene, that's the last scene before this whole marriage thing comes up, because he's not really, you don't really see him until the very end of the next episode. So it's kind of the last thought she has of Jamie, that he did that for her, So by the end, Lieutenant Foster comes back with his gang of people, and they do this filming of it with him on the high ground, and Dougal and Claire on the low ground, and all of a sudden it's kind of like Dougal is on his own, and he has his back up, and now you're on the bottom, and I'm at the top, and it kind of, everything is flip-flopped at the end, because now Claire is no longer alone. She's connected to these people a little more. She understands them a little more, and she has to face a choice at the end of the episode. So this was a very good episode for perspective. Garrison Commander. Now, Garrison Commander is one of my favorite episodes because it's a really high character episode, and it's a lot that's extra from the book, which is unusual for me to say this is one of my favorite episodes when there's a lot of extra stuff in the book. It's written by Ira Stephen Bear, who has a really good handle on blackjack, and he has a really good handle on character stuff, you know, the writing character stuff. So this is the first real episode of the series that really focuses in on the idea of identity. Now, the idea of identity is a major theme in the books. Just in general, the whole series has a lot of who, you know, discovering who you are, who you really want to be, what makes you who you are, how do you identify yourself. That's all a big theme in the series, in the book series, I mean. How, you know, whether it's titles or your country or your language or your accent, your names, your background, culture, all of that are identifiers for who you are. And all of that is dealt with in this episode. And it's done in a way that's not really like your traditional episode. It's done in like a style of a play, where the first, you know, where it's almost like all takes place in one room, in this big room where they have the dining area, and you see these big long monologues between people, and there's not a lot of action. It's much like a stage play in the way that it's constructed. It's very different. And really, the next 4 episodes, this one and the next 3, are all very uniquely constructed, none of them like the other. You know, they all have their own very interesting way that it was constructed. This one has the play construct. The next one, which is the wedding, has like this, after everything's over, moving forward and then jumping back and doing a flashback, and then moving forward, jumping back and doing another flashback. So it's like this forward, back, forward, back, forward, back type of storytelling. The next one, Both Sides Now, tells half the story from now, interspersed with story from 1945 with Frank. And then The Reckoning, which is episode 9, is told from Jamie's POV. So it's all like an interesting element in the way that they do the story for each of those episodes. She begins in this very sure of her people. That, you know, I'm among my people now, and Dougal's the Outlander here, you know? And she feels like she feels a little bit cocky and safe because she's among her English people. However, that turns by the end of the episode. And now Dougal is the outsider. By the end it shifts. And the only way to save her from the English, which is BJR, is to make her a Scot and change her identity. So it's very much all about what makes you who you are in this episode. It's very, Lord Thomas, when they come in, how many have seen the episode that I'm talking about? I know that there's so many people that are only book readers. Lord Thomas, all this kind of was, like I said, added from the book. But Lord Thomas is there with all his, you know, retinue of like very highfalutin officers, and there you can tell they all probably bought their commissions, and they're all, you know, having their fancy food. And he's just like, oh, it's so lovely to have an English rose in this horrible place, and she's being all gentle and nice, and Dougal's there, trying to be in her bodyguard, you know, in this situation, and he's not saying much, but you can tell he's not comfortable being here. And they start to treat, while they're treating her like gold, Lord Thomas is being very degrading Dougal by saying, you know, well, who's this specimen? He called him a specimen. He wasn't basically even referring to him as a man. He's like, this specimen here, and of Scott, you know, and he starts to tell him, you know, you know, this is Dougal Mackenzie. He's war chief for Clan Mackenzie, and he's like, war chief, eh? Does that make you a laird? And he's like making fun of him, you know? And you can see Dougal's just looking at him, just like wanting to squash him like a bug, you know? and Dougal, I have to give him credit because you know, Dougal has a very bad temper, but he held himself in check in this situation. And he starts to broaden his Scots as his way of saying, this is what I am, you know? And I'm not going to be any different because I'm here. And so he starts to talk with really heavy Scots. And they're like, I didn't understand a thing he said, you know, I wish these people would learn how to speak like Londoners. And Dougal says, if you want to hear Londoners speak, then why don't you go to London? And, you know, it's kind of this back and forth, they banter. And, you know, do you know who you're talking to? And it's all about, like, that's where I'm saying the identity starts with that. Eventually he leaves, and he says, I'll be downstairs where the good Scottish ale is, he says, and he leaves. And, you know, she proceeds to have this dinner, and she's trying to woo them. And finally she manages to charm her way into getting an escort to Inverness. And at this point, who enters but BJR? And he enters. He looks kind of more dirty, and you immediately sense that even though they're all English officers, he is definitely apart from this group of people around this dinner table. You can tell they don't like him, you know, that there's a definite division there. But you also can tell he's more of the real officer, and they're more of the name officers. He's more like the nitty-gritty, get stuff done officer, you know what I mean? And he comes walking in, and he's like, I don't know if any of you realize this, but you have the war chief of Clan Mackenzie sitting down in the bottom of the stairs here, drinking ale among all our people. And he's like, yeah, we know that. He brought her here. And he's like, really? You know, he gives her a look like, you know, is that so? How convenient. And he's the only one alarmed that, you know, that feels any kind of threat or any kind of a concern that the war chief is there. They're all taking him like he's nothing. You know, and so it tells you a lot in how everybody sees everybody. He decides she's messed, you know, he is not them, and he is going to get a way to get her to talk, because this is what he does. And so he needles his way in and gets her to basically reveal her sympathies. He like instigates her to speak up against, you know, what the English have done to the Scots. And then he sits back with a little smile, like, okay, I got her buried now. And they're all looking at her like, what the hell's your problem, you know? And so next thing you know, emergency crisis happens, and Crisis Claire goes off to fix a knee or whatever. And when she comes back, everyone's gone except for Blackjack Randall and Corporal Hawkins that's shaving his face. And she immediately has like this PTSD moment because she sees this razor that was her husband's razor that had been an heirloom passed down all these generations, and he has kept it all this time. She had been using it to shave his face, and she said, do you want me to pack this up for you to take with you? He says, oh no, it's far too valuable for that. No, I want to keep it here where it's safe. And so she had handled that razor and shaved her husband with it, and it caused her to have a sense of he's connected to my husband somehow, this man. And you know, because of that, I can't comprehend that my husband that's so kind and loving can be connected to this man and there not be something there that's kind. And so Claire, healer that she is, person that wants to help that she is, she tries to find ways to reach him. And she might as well just be reaching for the moon because, you know, he's not going to be reached. But he's going to let her think that she's reaching him because it's part of his game. So this is all this like psychological byplay going on in this whole episode. Really good episode. He starts to talk to her and says, well, you know, I think we need to tell each other about ourselves. Let me give you a glimpse of what I am. And he starts to tell her about his flogging of Jamie. You know, let me tell you the story behind it, because she says, oh, you flogged this boy 200 lashes. I know what you think of as punishment. And so he says, let me tell you a story about that. Did Dougal tell you that? Because he was there. And describes it as a masterpiece, the most beautiful thing he's ever seen, and all this. And he's relishing over it. And she can see that he's relishing over it. And all of a sudden he says that he talks about the thing that bothered him. You know, you see his happiness, oh, it was the most beautiful thing I ever seen. We were making a masterpiece. Da, da, da. And then all of a sudden he says, but the boy would not beg for mercy. And he says, the boy would not beg, you know. And you see him in the flashback, you see him lean up, he's like, are you scared? And Jamie's like, I'm only afraid I'll freeze to death by the time you're done, you know. And he's just like looking at him. And so that's the thing for Blackjack, is to make him break, you know. And he didn't break him in that 200 lashes, and he knows it, you know. And he wants that. That's the thing that he wants. He was denied it that first time. So keep that in mind because it's important. So at this point, he says, you know, I've been ravaged with war. I've seen the most horrible things. I've had to do the most horrible things. I'm beyond. You think that somebody like that could be, you know, redeemed? And she's like, I think that, you know, because she's thinking of her husband and all the trauma he's seen and how he's been going through a difficult time because of the things he had to do in the war. And she says, I've seen men at war and it can do things to men. And I think the fact that you have so much self-knowledge can help you. And he said, it'd be nice to think so. He says, well, let me start by helping you get to Inverness. And he kind of lets her think that she's getting to him and that he's going to try. And giving her that little glimmer of hope is part of his thing. He makes you feel like things are good. He did that with Jamie in the end too. You know, I'm just trying to make this nice for us and so forth. He tries to put his defenses down so that when he strikes, it's that much worse, you know? So, and that's that much more painful and that much more devastating for that person because they had a little hope it was going to go well. And that's pretty much what he does to Claire in this episode, you know? He says, let me start out by trying to get you safely to Inverness. And she kind of like has this bright look on her face and tear roll down her face. And she says, yes, you know, let's do that or whatever. And she stands and he gives her a hand to stand her up and then punches her in the stomach. And she goes bent over and he says, I know what I am. And I'm not, you know, going to change. Basically like, you know, yells at her. Then, this is even bigger thing, Corporal Hawkins comes in. He brings in Corporal Hawkins. Now, this is another classic thing that he does. He wants to bring down the people around him. Anything that's innocent, untouched, you know, and Corporal Hawkins is like this untouched, innocent kid. He wants to bring him down. It's typical bullying behavior, you know. He wants to bring him down to his level so that he feels more normal about himself. And that's pretty much what he's doing with Corporal Hawkins. So he tells Corporal Hawkins, you know, I want you to come over here and kick her. And, you know, he's like, what? He says, kick her. It's very free. He says, go ahead and do it. And he goes, I don't want to. He goes, I said do it. That's an order. So he made him come over and kick Claire. And then he said, harder. And when he went to kick her harder, that's when Dougal comes in and rescues her. But that's what he does. He wants to find a way to take away something that he knows he doesn't have anymore. He doesn't have that innocence that Corporal Hawkins has. So he wants to rob anyone else that has something that he doesn't have that he wishes he had. You know, goodness, Jeannie's defiance and strength, you know, whatever. And he wants to take that down. So that's pretty much his MO. He takes her to Ninian Spring, and he finally believes she isn't a spy when she drinks this magic water from Ninian Spring, which is kind of funny because you wouldn't think Dougal would be superstitious to believe that, but he was, I guess. And then we get another little piece of identity with Jamie to find out that he's a virgin. And they're all about to change that. She's going to go from being an English to a Scot. He's going to go from being a virgin to a non-virgin. And so we're all changing our identity in this episode. The wedding is certainly a favorite among a lot of people. Who would say the wedding is their favorite episode? Yeah. What other episodes would you say is a favorite from season 1?
I like the second episode.
Second episode,
Yeah.
Castle
Castle
Leo?
Leo.
Okay. I like the first one too. The wedding is a popular one.
I thought that was beautifully done.
Yeah, it was. They spend a lot of time. The reason I think people love it is they really teased it out. You know, they spent a lot of time really getting you to see how they grew closer and closer and built the relationship. And it's something they failed to do with Bree and Roger. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of people that are watching season 4 that don't read the books, that only know Roger from the show, don't really understand how great Roger is, you know, because they only have shown the conflict. They haven't shown any of the positive of Roger and Bree. They only showed a little bit of the conflict, and they made the conflict worse. And so it's kind of like, and then they're wondering, well, what is your problem with Roger? Well, it's because, you know, it was in the book. It might have been in the book, but it wasn't alone in the book. You know, it's kind of like if all you saw of Jamie was him beating the crap out of Claire in the Reckoning, and then some other thing, him calling her a whore or something like that, or a foul-mouthed bitch or whatever, and you don't see the other great things around all that to make you understand that's just a moment. It's not, his whole feeling. You have to have it all, or you're not going to understand those moments. I think they needed to tone them down, but that's another story. We'll get into that in the last week. Anyway. The structure is that unique flashback, move forward, and rule of three structure on that. We open on Claire and Frank's spontaneous wedding, that he invites her to in the street. And she kisses him, and when she kisses him, it breaks apart, and she's kissing Jamie. And it's kind of like a really great transition moment there. Again, she's self-reflecting in front of the mirror. Whenever she's reflecting, you'll see her in front of the mirror, in front of glass, in front of her reflection in some way. That's a tool they use a lot in the show. She's Sassenach wasted again. Jamie thinks it's because she fears he's going to force her, and he tries to reassure her that he's not going to do that. He doesn't know all the internal conflict that she's dealing with this wedding. Jamie's humor is on full display in this episode. He's very charming. He's saying these little romantic lines. He's just being so cutely innocent, in the way that he's being, that you just can't help, he's charming her. And she even says it, he's just charming. She still doesn't want to admit she loves him, but she cares for him. This episode is really loaded with humor because all of the flashbacks are funny that are interspersed in this wedding episode. And it's unusual for a wedding episode to have a lot of humor in it. You don't usually see, unless it's a comedy, like, for weddings and a funeral or something like that. But if it's a wedding episode of a show, you don't have it filled with a lot of humor. But with this show, you've got Angus and their little escapades getting a ring, and you've got the church and them having this battle spirit, scripture battle in the church, and all these little different, Ned with the whorehouse, getting the dress. It was really cute. Dougal's motivations. Now, Dougal has his own plotty motivations in this. Yes, he wants to keep Claire safe and all that, and save her from BJR because she could have caved and she didn't. She took a blow for them, and he feels he owes it to him. But that's certainly not why he's doing this. He's doing this because A, she knows too much, and he doesn't want her under interrogation with Blackjack Randall with all she knows now. You know what I mean? Because eventually he will break her, and he knows that. Number two, by her marrying Jamie, makes Jamie less eligible to become the laird for the Mackenzies. And that's, he doesn't want anything that's going to make Jamie elevated over him when Colin dies, that the clan would pick him. And so, because he has a Sassenach wife, it makes him less desirable. And so that's his motivation in it. And so everything's going according to their plan. He gets this wedding off, and Dougal says to Jamie as he's going upstairs, "You never thanked me." Right? And so in spite of his plan working, he's bitter about it. He is bitter that now, even though everything went the way he wanted it to go, and he's getting the benefits he wanted, he's still a little bit bitter that Jamie's now going to get the knock boots with Claire when he had kind of a little thing that, he thought Claire was hot because he's a ladies' guy. That's his MO. So it's kind of like, he wants Jamie to grovel and thank him. Anything to make Jamie feel subservient to him is like he tries to always do. A big theme in this episode is the idea of possessions, having possession. And you see in each when the flashback to Frank and in the current story, you notice they have both husbands say her new name as part of the script. He says, you will no longer be that, you'll be Claire Beecham Randall. And he says that to her in that little flashback, and then Jamie does a toast to her, and he says Fraser. So it's kind of like to throw at you her multiple names, said by her husbands, who then are claiming her basically in it. And you also see it when she says to him, when she gets her clothes off, and she says, "Have you never seen a naked woman before?" And he said, "I have." She says, "But not one so close, and not one that's mine." you know? So it's like a lot of, there's another like piece of possession. And there's a big moment when Jamie gives Claire his mother's pearls. And he says, it's the only thing I have left of her. They're very precious to me, as are you, Claire. And so these pearls, which is the most valuable thing he has, goes from his mother to him, and now they're in possession of her. So there's a lot of elements of changing possession in this episode. Then Claire makes love to him a third time, and symbolically wraps them together in his plaid as they're making love, and that's kind of a symbol as well. Remember I told you last week that pay attention all the times you see the wraps come out, because that has symbolism to it in this show. Another key moment, which is also tied to the end, is when Jamie says after their first time, did you like it? And she is faced with a choice of, do I tell him no to save myself from being put on the spot and facing the consequences of that and tell a lie and maybe hurt his feelings? Or do I tell him the truth, make him happy, but face the consequences of recognizing that truth? So she tells the truth. And then in the cold light of day, because it's very bright in the room when this happens, you see her, this is in this last picture here, you see her pick up her ring, put her other ring on, and she holds her hands up like this, and it's almost like she has a prayer of supplication in the way that she's holding. This is all, things I pick up in the way it's shot. She almost has like her hands in a prayer of supplication, asking for help in this situation that she is now in, because things have just gotten a lot more complicated for her. So this is a really good episode. Both Sides Now. Both Sides Now, it opens with a ring telephone, and it yanks you in, and it makes you remember Frank is still out there, and he's still looking, and he's still worrying, and he's still hoping. Now after this Wedding Bliss episode, we're all in Jean Claire land, you know what I mean? We don't want to think about Frank at this point, and we don't want to see him worrying and fussing and all of that. Everybody's like, we don't care about Frank. But the thing is, you need to care about Frank, because this is what Claire is thinking about. You need to feel the uncomfortableness, because then when he says, my wife is not with another man, he bangs his fist down on the table, and it cuts right to, you see, Jamie and Claire on this little mountaintop, playing handsy-feely and saying, oh, is it always like this when, you touch somebody? Is it all this? It's like you kind of feel like you want to kind of hide a little, like, oh, well, yeah, she kind of is. And she's not too upset about it. And you feel a little bit conflicted, because you kind of feel bad for Frank. It's good that you feel conflicted, because that is how she's feeling. She's enjoying it, and she's kind of happy that, things, she found this companion, and she likes it, but she doesn't like that she likes it, because she knows she can't stay here. She needs to go back to her husband as soon as she possibly can now, because this is getting too deep, for her. And so you're supposed to feel her conflict in that.
Is it usual that it is between us when I touch you?
I think this is a...
No, this is unusual. I was angry at myself for forgetting about my plan to return to my own time. So much had happened, so much had changed.
He's her lover, and the two of them left together. My wife is not another man. Stop. I want you.
I wasn't supposed to be here.
I'll take you to him. Come along.
I wanted it to be a dream, but I knew it wasn't. I was Claire Randall and Claire Fraser. The question was, who did I want to be?
The mince.
So that's kind of this episode. That was the elements in this episode. Now, Hugh Monroe gives them this dragonfly and amber. Claire looks at it, and she kind of feels like she can relate, because she feels stuck like that, looking at it. But at the same time, she gets caught up in Jamie's joyfulness, because Jamie's just like on cloud nine. He's on, you know, he has not a worry in the world. He's just thrilled. He's got this gorgeous wife. He's having sex. You know, he was a virgin before. He's, you know, everything's just roses for Jamie. You can just see he's all buoyant and happy and thrilled. And it kind of is contagious to Claire. You know, like she can't help but kind of be happy with him. But then when he finds out about this horse, and he says to her, to find this man, he knows who killed the sergeant, I can get the price lifted off of my head. And she's like, you know, she's happy for him, like, oh, good. And then he goes, and then I can bring you to Lollybrook. And you could be the lady in Lollybrook, and I'll be the laird, and like, basically, we'll just live happily ever after, and everything's just going to be great. And she's just kind of like, smiling, but at the same time in the back of her mind thinking, oh my God, I'm going to leave and break this kid's heart now. He's like totally in it, you know, like she could see it. And, you know, she doesn't want to do that to him. So it's really a tearing situation for her, because part of her loves it herself. Part of her feels herself getting more and more sunk in, you know, and she doesn't want to be. And then part of her knows that Frank must be worried sick. God only knows what he's worried and probably combing through, bugging the police, you know, because he's MI6, he's going to be freaking out. And she has all this going on, you know, like she feels guilty for that, she feels guilty for this, she feels guilty that she's going to end up breaking Jamie's heart when she disappears, all of this going on. And she's just trying to survive at this point. But, you know, she's surviving with a smile on her face because she's surviving with Jamie. That's a good thing. So Claire, she has a near rape situation. They go off, they're getting nookie in the woods, and Jamie, in his exuberance, doesn't pay attention to his surroundings. And this is part of Jamie really not used to being married yet. You know, he's used to just thinking about himself, worrying about keeping himself safe, and not worrying about, you know, the situation for anyone else. So if Donnie jumped him, you know, he can handle himself. But now he has to start thinking that he has two people, and it's the first time that's really challenged. You see him going and spazzing and trying to, you know, kiss her hands and hold her and tell her he's sorry and he should have looked and he didn't pay enough attention. And she's just kind of very quiet and pulled into herself, and it shows the dynamic of how they both respond to stress. But it's a wake-up call for Claire. She's like, okay, you know what, enough of this. I gotta get back to, I gotta find where these stones are and get back to them, you know. I need to get back to my husband. I need to get back to my time, you know. This is too much. So this is dangerous. I could have just been dead right now. It kind of clicks in her head that she has to go. And then at the same time, you see get jumped. And because these grifters try to screw him, and at the same time he gets jumped. And when he does, a little streak of blackjack comes out. He actually pulls out a literal blackjack, symbolically, and starts beating the hell out of this person. And I think he just lost it. It's been maybe a month or two that he's been going through this daily, going to the police station. They don't have anything to say, searching through maps, combing the countryside. And he's like at his wit's end, and all these people are going to mess with him and, you know, try to grift him. You know what I mean? When he's going through all of this, and he just lost it on this. People almost killed the guy. So at that point, he gets spiritual counseling from the Reverend. He gets pagan counseling from Mrs. Graham. Mrs. Graham tells him about the stones, and, you know, he tells her, you know, I just don't believe in that. And he's like, I'm going to leave in the morning. And so he's deciding he's going to try to move on. But he leaves her suitcase, which I always like that he leaves her suitcase there, because it's kind of like a little symbol, like maybe she'll come back someday. Her suitcase will be here waiting for her. Meanwhile, she escapes. He tells her to stay in the glade. She doesn't stay in the glade. And of course she goes to the stones. They have this very weird scene with the two of them running toward the stones. And she gets pulled back last minute, and pulled back by redcoat soldiers and taken to Fort William to face Blackjack. And she said, and he wouldn't have any time to think. He won't know I'm coming, but I have all this ride to plan of what I can do. You know, really self-assured she was. And she gets in there with this plan that she's going to use knowledge that he's really working for Sandria, and she's going to try to play this bluff off. And, you know, Blackjack Randall is not one to do a bluff with and to try to pull that off, because he will finagle that right out of you. And he did, and I think the way that she acted when she thought she won that bluff, she got there and she babied him and she tied his tie and she kind of talked all sing-songy like she was his mother. Now, I think that what you should do is that she's talking to him like this, trying to be all on the higher level, and he's just looking at her. And I think that ticked him off. And so whatever was going to happen to her was going to be worse because she did that. So I think she sealed her own fate. And then we end with, "I'll thank you to take your hands off my wife." And then we wait for 4 months for the second half of the season to come back because they want to torture people in this show. I said, thank God I read the book. I honestly think the book sales must have skyrocketed after that scene, because the people that didn't read the books, I think a whole ton went out there and said, okay, like, I need to know what happens. So I'm not waiting 4 months. Oh my goodness. So now we get to The Reckoning. Now, The Reckoning is one of my favorite episodes. The reason why, and if you get, I don't know, anybody here have the Blu-rays or the DVDs for season 1? You do? Okay. I personally, if I ever rewatch The Reckoning, I always watch it with the extended one that you got on the Blu-ray. There's so much more in that episode when you have all these extra scenes put in. If you ever get it, I advise you to look at that one, and I'm going to have a scene in here from that, because there's just so much more you get. There's so many more scenes, and it's really, really good when you look at that version. Jamie is on full display in this scene, in this episode, with all his King of Men glory. You get a unique point of view switch. It opens with the same line that Claire opens with in the first episode, where he says, "Strange, the things you remember." You know, that line, that's the same line this opens, but you're still looking at like a scenic thing of waterfalls and all that. Like she had, like there was scenic pictures when she said that line. It's kind of a mirror of that, you know. That's how they structured this. And they rewind the story a little, you know, and this is Matt Roberts wrote this episode, and this is a classic Matt Roberts thing. This is kind of what he does. He retells, like he did the print shop episode where he went back and told the other side of the story coming in so you could have it twice, and this is what he does. So he went back and told how Jamie found out she was even there and how he got there and how he got in that window, and then took it from there. The confrontation here with Blackjack Randall is pivotal because now for a second time, Blackjack Randall is denied what he wants to get from Jamie. You know, first he was denied at the flogging, now he's going to be denied here. He thinks he's got him because he's got this wife in his hands. And so he's going to be able to use this for leverage to get what he wants from Jamie. You know, he can see because Jamie is seething. And you can see it. There is no, like at the whipping post, you know, he was just kept his face straight, said, "I'm just afraid I'll freeze to death by the time you're done." He didn't react because it was just him. But watching this man putting a knife like he's going to cut her breast and you know, holding a knife to her throat and her boobs being hung out as he has her pulled back, you know, it's infuriating him. You know what I mean? And he's doing everything he can to hold himself in check, but you can see all the different facial expressions of pain, pissed offness, anger, everything under the sun, all joining together on his face. And of course, if we see it, Blackjack Randall's seeing it, right? So he knows, this is how I'm getting to him. I'm getting to him through this woman. You know, this woman somehow is my ticket to get to this guy. You know, so that gave him another little piece of information for later. So when he gets Jamie for the third time at Wentworth, you know, he said the third time's the charm, and now he knows that Claire is a key to get to him. You see the building of Blackjack in these earlier episodes. The river, once they escape, the river scene is another great scene in this episode. This was actually the episode they auditioned for their chemistry test on. I don't know if you ever saw it online, their chemistry test. But it's really fantastic. You know, they had it right from the start as far as their chemistry goes. And they looked, it was like they had been practicing it the whole time. It was the first time they did it. It was great. I skipped over this married thing. Let me show you that first real quick.
You make us your bride.
Congratulations. I look forward to hearing all about your nuptials.
I always thought there was something really fascinating about the fact that they don't fall in love until they're married.
You are my home now.
Can everybody hear
The
okay?
relationship really begins to expand. They begin to know more about each other, and ultimately their relationship is quite strongly tested.
You're tearing my guts out, Claire.
You know, it's not like there's a happily ever after straight away. It's her trying to find where her place is and what this new life and relationship means.
You wish to live separately.
Yeah, that's what I should want.
There is this very powerful sense of physical attraction between them.
There's so much I can scarcely breathe.
But he also has fallen in love with her. And so she's very much torn by this.
For him, it's a learning process, and that's what certainly takes their relationship forward.
If you've loved to watch the progression of Jamie and Claire's relationship, you're just really going to love seeing the fruition of that.
What was once just Claire's story, it's really the two of them. That relationship is at the foundation of everything that's Outlander.
These are dangerous times. Be careful.
Come back to me, James Fraser.
This is a little clip from that fight scene at the river. If you haven't watched the episodes, you're gonna like this. It's almost verbatim from the book. And there's just a part of it here, but the whole thing is really good.
You think, to punish you, I went for a walk in the woods on the chance that some British soldiers would be going by? Twice, Jamie, I went for a walk.
I ordered you to stay put.
I didn't have to do what you tell me to.
You are my wife.
Your wife. But you think I'm your property, don't you? You think I belong to you and you can't stand for someone to have something else that belongs to you.
You do belong to me, and you are my wife, whether you like it or not.
I don't like it. I don't like it one bit. That doesn't matter to you either, does it? As long as I'm willing to warm your bed, you don't care what I think or how I feel.
I love it. Their fights are the best fights, and they always stick with what Diana wrote too in these fights because they're just gold. They're so good. Anyway, every season they have a really great one. Every season there's like at least one scene where there's a great Jamie Claire fight. So then we have the spanking scene. Now next week when we discuss historical fiction and we get into the presentism stuff, we'll be getting into this, but this will apply to that. It's a different time and culture, just remember that, and a man is responsible for his wife's actions back then. I mean, something your wife does, the man is going to be held responsible for it. It's his duty to keep her in line. Like, that's the way it was done. Her property to keep his property. It was almost like she was his child in terms of rights and discipline. And that's just the way it was then. And it wasn't, that he's doing it with any intention of anything. It's just what he knows. And so for anybody that might have been offended by that, you need to understand that. But he does learn. I mean, that's the whole point of the whole thing. Like, it's to show you how when they start, they come from such different mentalities. Her as well, from him. And over the course of the series and the books, they grow closer and closer and closer and closer together to where, there's a lot of Jamie and Claire, and there's a lot of Claire and Jamie. You know what I mean? You start to see, her take on a lot of his spirituality and the way that he looks at life and stuff like that. You see him take on a lot of her modern viewpoints and defer to her when it comes to being open to things. So, they grow from that, but this is in the beginning, before they've had this is their first fight, They've only been married for days. There's a lot to learn. They grow from this, so. And when they get home, you get into the clan politics, because when Colin finds out that Dougal's raising Jacobite gold, and getting money to support the Jacobite efforts, he is not a happy camper at all. He feels very betrayed. And he's also ticked at Jamie about the marriage, because now this marriage makes it harder for him to be laird, and Colin secretly wants him to take over. He does not trust Dougal to handle the clan, and the clan is his responsibility. In the next slide, you'll see a scene that was deleted from the show that kind of has Colin putting this to Jamie. He says to him, you know, you win and you marry, like the part that we saw in the show where he says, you married Sassenach, you know, without my permission. And he's like, oh, I didn't mean any offense by it. So he goes, well, now you can never be made the clan. Now you're not. Now nobody will ever want you to be the head of the clan. So then after that scene, this scene happens, and I'll show you that in a second. I just want to finish this page. The only negative in this episode for me was the scene at the river with Leary, because it's set in motion. There's a lot of ways they went way off the ranch with Leary in this whole series on television. They really made a lot of mistakes that one mistake led to another mistake, in the way that they portrayed her, in the things that she knew, and the things that Jamie knows that she knew. And we kept going, this is going to be a problem. All the book people were like, this is going to be a problem in a couple books. And you know, you're making a problem here. And nobody would listen. And, you know, Tony's answer, Tony is the one that, you know, said I had problems with sometimes. Her answer was, oh, well, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's her answer when you tell her that it's going to mess up something down the road. So, so it's kind of upsetting, you know, when I see that scene, because I think, yeah, this is where it starts. So that scene by the river annoys me. And there's also a fantastic makeup scene. And next week we're also going to talk about the tie of sex and violence in these books. And this is a really great scene where it shows that, because they're kind of right on the edge of sexual passion with a little edge of violence in it, and that's kind of Claire and Jamie's thing a little bit, you know. And it's just how they roll. Their passion is so strong. It's right on the knife edge, you know, of where their love is so strong. When they're fighting, that's so strong, and sometimes when they have sex or when they're having a relation, it kind of blends those two ideas, because your passions are raised in both. And I'll get into that more next week, but that's a good scene that illustrates it. So next episode is called The Pricking of My Thumb, and we get the first prick of the thumb in the end of this episode when the ill wish is found. So before I move on, I want to show you this scene with Colin. This is from the deleted scene. If you're going to see Russian subtitles, just ignore that. And it shows you what Colin is up to and what he's thinking and the way Jamie is reacting. And this is why Jamie did not want her to leave, did not want her to leave the castle under any grounds when he wasn't there, you know, because he didn't trust this whole situation. So I'll play that for you.
My brother must never be allowed to succeed me as chief of the Mackenzies. Do you not agree?
Dougal has a fiery temper that cannot easily.
Ah, say no more. I see you can agree with me. I have his replacement still in mind. He stands before me.
But you've already declared my marriage precludes me from the honour.
For the time being, a marriage of convenience.
Identify your meaning.
I will not be stepping down anytime soon, nor is my health a cause for concern. But this is not England. Life here can be perilous.
Perilous? For whom exactly?
Oh, I meant no one in particular.
For a moment, I feared you were speaking of my wife. And if so, I would be forced to take that as a threat.
Of course you would. That is the precise mind of a chief.
And he's like, what the heck, dude? Wasn't that a good scene? I really wish they would have left that in. It says a lot in that scene, doesn't it?
Yeah.